Lester King sat alone in his home office, staring at the thick stack of contracts that marked the official end of an era. After 32 years of building King Technologies from the ground up, often at the cost of sleep family dinners and school plays, he had finally sold the company for $32 million. The ink on the documents was barely dry, but his heart felt fuller than it had in years. It was not just about the money. It was about freedom, a legacy, a well-earned breath after a long uphill climb. He reached for his pen to sign the final form when he heard the front door open. Dennis arrived unannounced. Lester's only son, once a curious child who used to crawl under his father's desk, was now 38, a man who had long drifted between business ideas, debts, and disappointments. With him was Wendy, his sharply dressed wife, whose quiet presence often felt more observant than warm. The moment Dennis entered the office, his eyes locked onto the paperwork like a hawk spotting prey. "You sold it," Dennis said, lips curling upward, though his voice lacked true celebration. "I did," Lester replied, leaning back with a rare smile. "It's done. After 3 decades." Wendy offered a nod, but no words of congratulations. Dennis stepped forward. "So now you can finally help me. I need $5 million. The room fell silent. Lester blinked, the smile fading from his face. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Dennis said. $5 million. I've got debts to cover, and I want to launch my own business. You've got $32 million now. What's 5? Lester's heart sank. This was supposed to be a moment of connection, pride and reflection. Instead, it was a negotiation. He had sacrificed years for that company, raising Dennis alone after his wife passed, building from nothing, keeping promises he never voiced aloud. And now, instead of hearing, "I'm proud of you," he was hearing, "You owe me." Wendy shifted slightly, her eyes scanning the desk. "Maybe we could talk about this more calmly," she said sweetly. "Dennis just thinks it would be wonderful if you could help us get started." "Get started," Lester said, not raising his voice. "He's been starting things for 15 years. He stood and carefully tucked the contracts into a drawer. "Come to the party tomorrow. Bring your in-laws. We'll celebrate properly. And we can talk then about how to help each other responsibly." Dennis scoffed. "Responsibly? You mean like a loan with terms and conditions? I mean like family." Lester said, his voice measured who actually cares about each other's future. Wendy leaned closer to Dennis and whispered something too low for Lester to hear. Dennis's face hardened. "If you don't help us now, don't expect us at your party," he said sharply. "Don't expect us for Sunday dinners, holidays, anything." Lester's breath caught, not because of the threat, but because of the realization. The boy who once brought him crayon drawings of office buildings, who once dreamed of joining the company, was gone, replaced by someone he barely recognized. "That's your choice," Lester said quietly. "The party starts at 7. Dennis spun toward the door, but not before slamming his fist onto the desk. A coffee mug tipped, spilling across the edge of the quarterly reports Lester no longer needed. Wendy placed her hand on Dennis's arm, but her gaze remained locked on Lester's, unwavering, unreadable. As they walked out, their voices echoed sharply down the hall. Through the blinds, Lester watched Dennis rev the BMW's engine, Wendy already speaking on her phone. Her tone was clipped urgent, like she was planning something. Lester stood there for a long time, staring at the spreading coffee stain like it was a metaphor made real. 30 years of devotion had turned into entitlement in his son's eyes. And Wendy, she was always polite, always composed. But there was calculation behind her smile. There had always been. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, where Dennis used to play catch with his grandfather. Lester remembered that child, that gap-toothed boy who once said, "When I grow up, I want to help you run the company, Dad." What happened to that boy? The sting of betrayal didn't come from raised voices or slammed doors. It came from the quiet certainty that everything he'd built meant nothing to the people he loved most. Yet Lester didn't feel angry, just clear. Tomorrow, he would throw the celebration he had earned. His true friends would be there, the ones who knew how far he had come. And if Dennis and Wendy chose to be absent, well, that would say more than any speech. As the clock ticked into evening and the coffee stain dried into the paper, Lester made a decision. He would no longer chase approval from those who only saw dollar signs. Tomorrow, he would raise a glass, not just to retirement, but to peace. And he would do it with or without his family's applause. Lester woke early the next morning to the soft rustle of leaves brushing against his bedroom window. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of maple and morning dew. October had arrived quietly, draping golden hues over his quiet suburban street. He brewed coffee in the kitchen, watching steam rise into the soft sunlight. Today was meant to be a celebration, a toast to 3 decades of perseverance, of building something from scratch, and finally letting go. He laid out a checklist across the kitchen table, each item written in his precise handwriting. Flowers from Millfield Gardens, oysters and cheeses from Delacroix Delicates, champagne from Romano's guest list. 47. Confirmed. Lester smiled to himself. After yesterday's encounter with Dennis, the support of old friends felt more necessary than ever. By mid-morning, Lester was downtown. Vincent from Romano's greeted him at the wine shop door, arms outstretched. "You magnificent devil," Vincent said with a grin. "I heard the news." Lester laughed. "I need your finest bottles. Tonight's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of evening." He left with Dom Perignon and vintage Bordeaux carefully packed into the trunk of his car. At Delacroix Delicates, Marcel personally selected cheeses and cured meats, his accent adding flair to each recommendation. "Your retirement deserves elegance, Mr. King." Back home, Lester supervised setup with Susan's catering team. The terrace was transformed, white linens, silver cutlery, jazz, humming from hidden speakers in the garden. Candles floated in glass bowls, and string lights traced the edges of the wooden pergola. Everything gleamed with quiet sophistication. At 2 o'clock, Lester's phone buzzed. A message from Dennis. "Wendy's parents would like to come early to meet you properly." "Around 6, okay?" Lester paused, rereading the message. He remembered meeting Homer and my Thompson twice. Kind people from Wisconsin, modest, gentle. Certainly not the scheming type. Still, Wendy's motives felt layered, never simple. He typed a simple reply. 6 works. I'll be ready. Throughout the afternoon he moved between tasks with steady hands and a calm mind. He placed framed photos on side tables, Dennis as a child, the first King Technologies ribbon-cutting team gatherings over the years. In his study, he laid the signed contracts into a soft leather portfolio. It was not just about the number 32 million, but about every late night, every lonely dinner, every risk that had paid off in the end. At 4 the phone rang again. Jim Patterson, his oldest friend, the one who had witnessed the company's birth from Lester's garage. "Tomorrow's the big toast, huh?" "Tonight," Lester corrected with a smile. 7 sharp. We wouldn't miss it for the world. Martha's already picking out her earrings. Lester chuckled. "Good. I'll have the good stuff ready." After they hung up, Lester sat for a moment on the edge of his bed, exhaling deeply. A strange peace settled over him. Despite the tension with Dennis, despite Wendy's icy glances, there was still warmth in this world. Real friends, loyal people, honest laughter. That was what this night would be about. But beneath the peace, something shifted. A sense of watchfulness. At 5:30, Lester stood on his terrace, hands in his pockets. The sun was low, casting amber across the lawn. The garden glowed. The moment felt sacred, earned rare. He looked back through the open French doors to the kitchen, where candles flickered and glasses sparkled. Then came the hum of a car pulling into the driveway. He didn't need to look to know it was Dennis. Lester stepped inside, straightened his collar in the hallway mirror, and walked toward the door. The bell rang at exactly 6. Standing on the porch were Dennis and Wendy, both dressed sharply with practiced smiles. Behind them were Homer and my Homer, in a slightly outdated suit, my holding a wrapped gift with both hands. Lester offered a welcoming nod. Dad Dennis began. "We really appreciate this." Homer extended a hand. "Congratulations on your retirement, Lester." Dennis told us how hard you worked. Lester took the handshake, noting the man's sincerity. "I'm honored you're here." They stepped inside, compliments trailing from Homer and Mai as they admired the decor. Wendy walked slightly behind her heels, clicking softly against the hardwood. "Everything looks beautiful," she said with practiced charm. "You really outdid yourself." In the kitchen, Lester offered wine. "We'll begin around 7. Please make yourselves at home." Wendy smiled. "Actually, before the other guests arrive, we were hoping to have a private word." Lester tilted his head slightly. "About just some family matters," Dennis added quickly. Lester met his son's eyes. He saw nervousness, but also hesitation. Not quite guilt, not quite trust, something in between. He took a slow sip of his wine, then set the glass down carefully. "Let's enjoy the evening first," he said. "We can speak later." The atmosphere held for a moment tight, unsure. But then, Mai broke the tension with a soft laugh. "The flowers are stunning." "Are those from Millfield?" "They are," Lester said, grateful for the shift. For the next hour, the house filled gradually with guests, old friends, neighbors, business partners from long ago. Smiles lit up the terrace. Music played. The scent of roasted lamb wafted in from the kitchen. Frank Morrison offered a toast early, and Dr. Sarah Chen commented on the perfection of the ambience. Lester moved among them with quiet pride. The tension from earlier began to fade, though never fully disappeared. Somewhere deep down, he kept an eye on Wendy. She moved gracefully, complimenting the catering, sharing stories, laughing at the right moments. But there was something too smooth in the way she worked the room. Too curated. Still, the night was young, and Lester was ready for whatever came next. By 7 o'clock, the terrace had transformed into a soft symphony of light and conversation. Candles flickered against crystal glasses, and jazz floated gently across the garden from speakers hidden among trellises. The October air carried the faint scent of maple wine and warm food. Laughter rippled from table to table. Lester moved through it all with a quiet sense of pride. It had taken decades to reach this moment, this night of elegance, gratitude, and companionship. His friends had come not for the money, not for the status, but because they remembered the man who once struggled to get a business loan, who sponsored school computer programs when no one else would, who showed up quietly for people in need. Jim and Martha Patterson, the Richardsons. Dr. Chen Frank from the bank. They were all here. Each one with their own memories of Lester, of King Technologies, of the hard work behind the success. And then amid the laughter and wine glasses, Dennis and Wendy arrived on the terrace. Wendy wore a black cocktail dress that shimmered slightly under the garden lights. Dennis, in a tailored grey suit, walked beside her with his shoulders squared and eyes scanning the crowd. Behind them, Homer and Mai followed, looking slightly overwhelmed but genuinely warm. Dad Dennis said as he approached, his tone even. "Thank you for including us tonight." Lester nodded, motioning for them to join the gathering. Everyone deserves to celebrate hard-earned milestones. Wendy stepped forward with a wrapped box. "Just a little something to show our appreciation," she said with a flawless smile. "We're honored to be here." As the evening progressed, guests welcomed them with the same warmth they had extended to others. Jim quickly struck up conversation with Homer about teaching. Martha complimented Mai on her scarf. Wendy made rounds like a seasoned hostess, charming the catering staff, laughing in all the right places. Lester observed her carefully. She was playing a role and playing it well. Dennis stayed close to his father for most of the evening. He asked about retirement plans, commented on the flower arrangements, even helped refresh a few drinks. For a while, Lester allowed himself to believe there might be a turn. Some flicker of the old boy who used to dream about joining the company, not exploiting it. Dad Dennis said at one point, handing him a fresh glass of wine, "Tell everyone about the trip you're planning." "Scotland, right?" Lester nodded, accepting the glass. "First stop after the sale finalizes. Scotland, then maybe Ireland. A few months to actually see the world, not just business hotels and conference rooms." "Well earned," Dr. Chen said warmly. 30 years of 12-hour days deserve something beautiful at the end. Lester lifted the glass slightly, almost out of habit. But before he took a sip, his phone buzzed in his pocket. An incoming call from Harold, his attorney. Lester excused himself quietly and stepped back inside through the French doors leading to the living room. "Sorry to interrupt your evening," Harold said, as soon as Lester answered, "but we need to confirm Monday's wire timing. The buyer's bank wants to finalize everything before close of business." "No problem," Lester replied, walking toward the front windows, wineglass still in hand. "Monday morning works fine. Everything's in place." As Harold confirmed the timeline, Lester's eyes wandered out to the terrace. And that's when he saw her. Wendy stood at the drink table, her back to most of the guests. Her movement was smooth casual, but Lester's eyes narrowed. Her hand dipped into her clutch, pulled out something small, unfolded precise. A packet. She scanned the crowd, then leaned over a single wine glass. His wine glass. He froze. A fine powder slipped from her fingers into the drink. In one smooth motion, she stirred it with a cocktail stirrer, then returned both stirrer and packet into her clutch. No one else noticed. No one else was looking. But he was. Lester Harold's voice came through the line. "Did you get that?" Lester barely heard him. "Yes," he replied slowly. "Let's finalize Monday morning." He ended the call and remained still. Through the window, Wendy had rejoined the group, her face, the same calm, polished expression. She laughed softly at something Dennis had said, eyes twinkling under the string lights. But from her position she could clearly see the drink table. She was watching, waiting. His mind spun not in panic, but in calculation. Every apology, every graceful smile, every compliment about the flowers and music. It was all a performance carefully scripted. And it had led to this. The glass still sat there, laced with something lethal. One sip would have ended him quietly, quickly. A retired man drinking at his own party. No one would have suspected a thing. It would have been tragic, but believable. Except she had made one mistake. She did not know he had been watching. Lester inhaled deeply. He straightened his jacket and stepped away from the window. There was no fear in his chest now, only resolve. He had survived cutthroat boardrooms, legal ambushes, and financial betrayals. This was not business. This was personal. And he was prepared. He stepped back onto the terrace, with the same gentle smile he had worn all evening. Wendy noticed him immediately. Everything settled with the lawyer, she asked, her tone light. "Just fine," he replied, moving back into his circle of friends. "Perfect," Wendy said. "We were just saying, it's the ideal time for a toast." Jim raised his glass. "Absolutely. Lester, this is your moment." "Yes," Wendy added, gesturing subtly to the wine glass sitting at the edge of the table. "Your glass is right there waiting." Lester looked at it. He smiled. "Let's make this toast memorable," he said. Lester moved through the garden like a man completely at ease, even as his heart beat hard against his ribs. The air smelled of champagne and roses. From the terrace, the clink of glasses and murmurs of conversation filled the night. No one suspected that the host of the evening had just discovered a murder plot with his name on it. Wendy's eyes followed him. She was watching the wine glass, the one she had tampered with. He smiled warmly as he stepped toward the table. "Actually," Lester said, turning toward Dennis and Wendy with perfect composure. "Why don't you both help me fetch that special bottle of Dom Perignon, the 96 vintage? We'll make a real toast." Dennis brightened. "Of course, Dad. That'll be great." Wendy's smile flickered. "Let's make it special." They disappeared into the kitchen together, just three family members setting up for a toast. A perfect scene. No suspicion, no rush. Just long enough for Lester to slip back to the drink table. As he passed Homer, he paused. "How's retirement treating you?" he asked casually. Homer smiled. "It's strange. I wake up and have nowhere to go. But we're planning a road trip. Yellowstone, maybe the Grand Canyon." "Beautiful places," Lester replied, nodding. The table held two nearly identical wine glasses. One poisoned, one clean. As Homer continued talking about his travel plans, Lester reached forward in effortless motion and switched the glasses. The poisoned one slid into place next to Homer's seat. His own glass, now safe, settled where it had always belonged. 3 seconds. No one noticed. "Those parks will be unforgettable," Lester said, offering a steady smile. "Especially in fall." "I sure hope so," Homer replied. "It'll be our first long trip since we retired." Lester gave his shoulder a gentle pat. "You'll love it." Moments later, Dennis and Wendy returned with the vintage champagne and the good flutes. Dennis beamed as he set them down. Wendy glanced quickly at the wine glass, still there, still in place. She relaxed. "Everyone," Lester called out, raising his switched glass. "Hi, please. Gather around." Conversations hushed. Chairs scraped lightly against the stone. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward the man who had built an empire from nothing and who now stood ready to toast his way into retirement. "Friends," Lester began, his voice warm but firm, "this truly is one of the most meaningful nights of my life. Not because of the money, not even because of the company I built, but because of the people standing here with me tonight." He looked at Jim, at Martha, at the Richardsons, at Dr. Chen and Frank, at Homer and Mai, at the neighbors and colleagues who had weathered life's storms with him. 30 years ago, I had a dream. That dream took sacrifice, long nights, and plenty of setbacks, but I didn't do it alone. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the group. This toast is for loyalty, for integrity, for people who stood by me not for what they could take, but for who we became together. Dennis's expression was proud. Wendy's was watchful. Lester paused. Then he continued, his tone shifting slightly. "But I've also learned recently that not everyone who smiles at you means you well. Not everyone who calls you family is truly on your side." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Wendy's smile faltered. "I hate to say this, but tonight, someone tried to poison me." A collective gasp. Wendy blinked. Her eyes darted to the glass. "Not long ago, while I was inside taking a phone call, someone slipped a foreign substance into my wine. They stirred it carefully and made sure no one saw. But I did." Dead silence fell. Lester turned his head slowly. "Homer," he said, his voice calm but urgent, "don't drink that wine." The older man froze glass, halfway to his lips. Mai gasped beside him. "It's not yours," Lester said. "It's mine. Or it was meant to be." Eyes turned to Wendy. She took a step back, visibly trembling. Dennis looked stunned. "Wait. What? What are you saying?" "I'm saying, I saw Wendy tamper with my drink," Lester replied, voice sharp now. "She thought I wasn't looking." She was wrong. Wendy's face drained of color. "That's insane," she snapped. "You're mistaken. Why would I ever—" "You dropped something into my glass," Lester interrupted. "A powder. Then you stirred it. Then you pocketed the evidence. That's a lie. Then you insisted I make a toast. Urged me to drink from that exact glass." I was being polite." Lester took a step forward. "Then why did you switch glasses with Dennis's father?" Wendy's mouth opened, then closed again. Dennis stared at her, searching her face for some explanation. "Wendy, is this true?" "Of course not," she snapped. "He's trying to make me look bad because you wanted $5 million, Lester finished. "Because you knew you'd never get it unless I was out of the way." Jim stepped forward. "We can test the wine," he said evenly. "There's still some left. A simple analysis will tell us everything." Lester moved toward Homer's glass. Wendy lunged. The glass shattered on the stone floor. Red wine splashed in every direction. The guests cried out. Wendy gasped dramatically. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." "My hand slipped." "No, it didn't," Lester said quietly. Now everyone saw it. The panic, the guilt, the desperate attempt to erase evidence. Dennis stepped back from his wife, horror spreading across his face. You tried to kill him." Wendy's voice rose in pitch. "No, I didn't. This is all a misunderstanding." But her act had crumbled. Her mascara ran. Her eyes flitted from one guest to another, seeking a friendly face, a defender, a way out. None came. Lester spoke calmly without rage. "You used Dennis's apology as a distraction. You tried to kill me during the toast in front of everyone and make it look like natural causes. But I've spent my life outsmarting people who thought they were clever." Silence reigned. Then, "We're leaving." Wendy hissed. "Come on, Dennis." But Dennis didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the wreckage at the broken glass. The red wine soaking the stone. The marriage that had just unraveled in front of 50 witnesses. "I'm sorry," Dennis whispered. Lester nodded. "So am I." For a long moment no one moved. The clatter of the broken wine glass echoed in their minds, lingering like thunder after lightning. Wendy stood frozen in place, breathing hard, her eyes darting from face to face. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard it. There were no more explanations to spin, no charm to lean on. The performance was over. Dennis looked like someone who had just been dropped into a world he did not recognize. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Lester could see the war in his eyes, shock, shame, heartbreak. Wendy turned to him, her voice now trembling. "Dennis, please. You know I would never hurt your father. He's twisting this. He set me up." Lester didn't flinch. "I saw you," he said, calm as ever.
"And the glass was never mine after that moment. You poisoned your own father." All heads turned to Homer. He had sunk into one of the patio chairs, his hands shaking. Mai stood beside him, her palm resting gently on his back. She looked pale, stunned, but not angry yet. Wendy's voice cracked. It was supposed to be symbolic. Not real, just to scare him. "I didn't mean for anyone to actually get hurt." "But someone almost did," Mai said, finally speaking. Her voice was small, but every word cut. "Your own father." Wendy blinked. "I didn't know the switch. How was I supposed to know?" "You weren't supposed to know," Lester said, "because you didn't think anyone would notice. But I noticed." Wendy stood completely still now, her hands curled tightly at her sides. Then with a burst of frustration, she turned on her heel. "We're done here," she snapped. "Dennis, let's go." She took 3 steps before realizing he had not followed. Dennis had not moved. He looked at her, his wife, the woman who had convinced him to demand $5 million from his father, the woman who had smiled through every lie, the woman who had almost killed his own dad. "Dennis," she said now, pleading, "let's go." He swallowed hard. "I just need a minute." Her face twisted with disbelief. "You believe him over me? I saw what everyone saw," he replied softly. I didn't want to see it." His voice cracked on the last word. Wendy turned away from him, her expression hardening once more. "You're weak," she muttered. "Just like him." Then she walked out. No dramatic exit, no screaming, just heels clicking against stone, then fading down the side path into the night. A few moments later, the sound of a car starting echoed faintly from the driveway. Silence followed. Lester looked at the guests, most of them still standing, many with untouched glasses in hand. Some looked heartbroken, others looked furious, but none looked confused. Jim stepped forward. "Lester, do you want us to call the police?" Lester shook his head slowly. "No, not tonight. This was never about revenge. He turned toward Homer and Mai. Homer had not spoken since the confrontation. "I didn't know," Homer whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," Lester said. Mai stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "We are so sorry. We didn't raise her like that. I don't know who she's become." Lester looked at them, two people who had just watched their daughter implode in front of a crowd. He saw their shame, their pain, and he made a choice. "You are not responsible for her actions," he said quietly, "and I am grateful you're here." Mai's eyes filled with tears. "You could have let Homer drink that. You could have let it happen." Lester nodded. "But that's not who I am." Behind them, the terrace slowly returned to stillness. Some guests began to step back inside, whispering apologies, well wishes, and quiet words of support. Others stayed to help pick up the glass shards and reset the wine table. Dennis remained behind. He stood near the edge of the terrace, looking out toward the garden, toward nothing really. Lester approached him. "I didn't know," Dennis said. "I didn't think she would, actually." "I know," Lester replied. "But you brought her here. You stood by her." Dennis nodded, eyes red. "I thought she believed in me. I thought we were a team." Lester didn't say anything. After a long pause, Dennis added, "Do you hate me?" Lester looked at his son. Not the man standing in a tailored suit, but the child he once carried on his shoulders. The boy who used to fall asleep in his lap after school. "No," he said. "But I need you to find out who you are without her." Dennis looked down. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he said. "I'm not offering it tonight," Lester replied. Dennis gave a small nod, then turned and walked down the stone path, disappearing into the shadows Wendy had left behind. When Lester turned back, he found Homer and Mai still standing nearby, uncertain. Mai held her husband's arm tightly as if steadying both of them. "You're welcome to stay," Lester said simply. They looked at each other. Then Homer nodded. "We'd be honored." Lester glanced at the half-cleared table, the still-lit candles, the remaining guests, who lingered to help. It was not the party he had imagined, but it had revealed something far more important than congratulations or applause. It had revealed truth. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting soft gold across Lester King's terrace. Empty wine glasses shimmered faintly in the early morning light. The party was long over, but the echo of it, the laughter, the music, the confrontation still lingered in the quiet. Lester stood at the edge of the lawn, holding a cup of black coffee. He hadn't slept much. He didn't need to. Sleep was for people with unfinished business. But last night, something had closed, cleanly, unmistakably. A chapter 30 years in the making. Not just the sale of King Technologies, but a deeper release of expectation, of entitlement, of illusions about what it meant to be a father or a son. He sipped his coffee and looked toward the garden path. Homer and Mai had stayed in the guest room. After everything, they hadn't asked. They hadn't assumed. They had simply offered to help clean, and when Lester told them to stay the night, they'd both cried. Now the back door creaked open behind him. Lester Mai's voice was gentle. He turned. She wore one of the guest robes and held a second mug of coffee. "Hope you don't mind," she said, smiling faintly. "The kitchen just felt so peaceful." "Of course," he said. "This is your home too now, whenever you want it to be." She didn't reply, but her eyes said everything. A few moments later, Homer joined them. He looked tired, but grounded. He clapped Lester on the shoulder and said, "You saved my life. So now I owe you breakfast." They all laughed, soft, relieved, real. Later that day, after the house had been cleaned and the last traces of the party cleared away, Lester sat in his study, the leather portfolio in his lap. The signed contracts, the $32 million sale, were just paper now. The money was already moving banks, coordinating lawyers, confirming. But it wasn't the money that filled him with peace. It was clarity. He walked to his safe, unlocked it, and placed the portfolio inside. Then he closed the safe and turned away from it for good. That afternoon, he met Jim Patterson at a quiet bistro in town. Jim leaned back in his chair, swirling his iced tea. "You really plan to go through with it Scotland first?" Lester nodded. "Then maybe Ireland." I want to see the fjords before I'm too old to hike." "You're not old," Jim said. "I'm exactly old enough," Lester replied with a smile. Jim chuckled. "Well, promise me this. You'll send a postcard when you finally find that castle you always dreamed of retiring in." "I won't need a castle," Lester said. "I just want peace, and people who mean what they say." Jim nodded, more serious now, and Dennis Lester paused. "He called this morning, left a message." "What did he say?" Lester looked out the window. He said he was sorry. Again. That he's thinking about checking into a program, not for addiction, but for perspective, for getting out of her shadow. "You believe him?" Lester took a long breath. "I believe he finally saw who she was. But it's not about me believing him. It's about him figuring out who he wants to be." "And will you let him back in?" Jim asked. "When he's ready," Lester said. "But next time it won't be for money. It'll be for Sunday dinner." That evening, Lester packed a small suitcase, just enough for a week in Scotland. The rest of his plans could wait. He printed out his flight details, then paused at the printer tray. Lying beneath the itinerary was a photo, one of the ones that had sat on the terrace table during the party. Dennis, age 10, sitting beside Lester on the day King Technologies opened its first real office. That boy still lived somewhere inside the man who had nearly betrayed everything. Lester took the photo and placed it carefully in the inner pocket of his travel bag. Not as a memory of failure, but as hope. Because people change. Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes for the better. Epilogue. 3 months later, a letter arrived from Norway. It was handwritten on thick stationery, and the return address was a town Lester couldn't pronounce. Inside was a photo, Lester standing by a quiet river, a glacier behind him, his face windburned and smiling. He looked 10 years younger. The note was short. "Dear Jim, I stood in silence for a long time this morning, just watching the river move past the rocks, and I realized something. I didn't lose a son that night I found myself, and in doing so, I made room to let him find himself too. Freedom is not about money. It's about knowing who deserves your time, your trust, and your heart. I've never been richer." Lester. As the quiet light of morning touched the terrace, what lingered was not the drama nor the shame, but the silence that follows truth, clear, steady, and unshakable. In that silence, Lester King found something far greater than applause or victory. He found peace in knowing he had chosen dignity over bitterness and truth over silence. Not many saw the moment his hand paused over the poisoned glass. Even fewer would know what it meant when he let go of vengeance and instead held on to grace. But in that small, unseen choice, the course of many lives shifted. And that's the power of quiet strength. It does not demand attention, but it changes everything. There was something heartbreakingly human in how it all unfolded. The man who built a legacy was nearly undone by the people he trusted most. The son who once sat proudly on his father's lap could not recognize the weight of that legacy until it almost vanished. And the woman who wore a perfect smile became the face of betrayal, revealed not by rage, but by calm eyes that had seen enough. Yet this story was never about revenge. It was about the gentle triumph of someone who refused to become what the world expected of him. Lester could have exposed Wendy in anger. He could have struck back with the very cruelty she used. But instead, he acted with clarity, patience, and purpose. In doing so, he reminded everyone, perhaps even himself, that real justice doesn't scream. It speaks softly and it stands its ground. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Hold your ground with kindness. Defend your truth without cruelty. And never underestimate the strength of those the world overlooks. Because sometimes the person we quietly dismiss is the one holding everything together. In a world so quick to judge, where appearance often overshadows character, Lester's story reminds us to look deeper. He was a man many saw as mild, perhaps even forgettable. But in the moment that mattered most, he rose not with fury, but with unwavering grace. Like a candle in a storm-lit window, one quiet act of courage can light the way through even life's darkest turns. So tonight, as you sit with this story, perhaps with a warm drink or the hum of evening in the background. Take a moment to think of someone in your life who's been underestimated. Maybe that someone is you. Remember, peace is not the absence of betrayal, it's what you choose to build after the truth has been revealed. And if this story touched your heart even just a little, consider sharing it with someone who may need the reminder that quiet strength is still strength, and that kindness, even when tested, is never wasted. Let it travel softly like a good story told at the end of a long day, and let it linger.